Hello and welcome to this podcast from the Professional Practices and Financial Services team here at Saffery. My name is Jamie Lane. I'm a partner and head of the group based in our Bournemouth office. And in this episode, I'm joined by Richard Crook, our Marketing Business Development Director. Now, if you're a keen podcast listener, you'll probably remember that Richard appeared on a previous episode where he discussed the topic of rebranding. And for context, he's been in the professional service industry for over 25 years, having worked at firms such as Deloitte, Colliers and Savills. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about winning new business, and in particular, how professional services firms go about doing this in a hybrid working world, especially following the COVID pandemic. With so much having changed over the last few years in terms of people's working habits, there's been a clear impact on the ability to build and retain client relationships, and we're going to cover what these changes might mean going forward. So, firstly, welcome, Richard. Good to see you again.
Pleasure, Jamie. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, should we kick off and with perhaps just discuss some of the more traditional ways of winning new business that you've had first experience with in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I always say to people about winning new business is it's all about building your personal profile. You and only you need to take responsibility for your personal profile. Now, it used to be that was probably and principally around going to in-person networking events, meeting clients, meeting targets, meeting intermediaries. That world has changed a bit now. Building your personal profile is also very much a digital task. And in the B2B world that we're in, that principally involves around using LinkedIn. So firstly, build your personal profile. Secondly, much as there are less of them now, it's still really important to build that brand by being out there, networking, going to events, seminars, drinks receptions. Make sure you keep in front of your intermediaries because they're so important for referrals. Keep in front of your clients because I always say to people, if you don't, other people will. And then the other thing, which I think is very, very important in professional services, is when you have that opportunity, absolutely make sure you maximize it by putting in a very professional pitch document. So we're very big fans at Saffery on creating bespoke tenders and credentials and presentations, and we have a large pitch team to do it. So you've done all that hard work and all that groundwork and you've had an opportunity, make sure you're maximising it by doing a really professional response.
Okay, so going back to the digital piece, so what you talked about earlier was building your personal brand becomes a sort of digital as well as in-person process now. The digital being probably the latest string to your bow as an individual. You mentioned LinkedIn. What should people be doing on LinkedIn? And are there other examples of social media channels or ways of building your digital profile?
Yeah, there are other channels, but most of them, frankly, are irrelevant. I would suggest people maximize all their effort into LinkedIn. It's the world's biggest B2B social media platform. You can still use X, formerly known as Twitter. Some people use Facebook, but I think by far the key one is using LinkedIn. And how do you do it? Well, firstly, my suggestion would be don't be a voyeur. Because if you're a voyeur, whilst you may be building your social and digital knowledge, you're not actually building your brand because no one knows that you're just reading other people's content. So my top tips on LinkedIn are be a thought leader, be an opinion piece creator, like content, comment on other people's content, follow your key clients, follow your targets, be seen to socially sort of interact with them. And there's actually something very interesting on LinkedIn, which is called your social selling index. So you can Google it. How do I find my SSI score? And it's basically LinkedIn give everyone a score out of 100 on how well you use the platform to socially interact. And it covers everything from the amount of posts that you create and share yourself to the amount that you engage with other people, whether you comment, whether you like, whether you repost. How good are you at creating contacts, sending you LinkedIn requests? How often do you message within LinkedIn? So if there's one thing I'd say, if you're not sure about, am I any good? at creating a digital brand and profile, go and have a look at your SSI score.
How do you find it?
Just go into Google. The easiest way is just ask Google, how do I find my LinkedIn social selling index score? You can find it in LinkedIn itself, but it's a bit convoluted. So it's easier just to Google it and you'll find a link.
Okay, interesting. So LinkedIn, sorry, is my only sort of social media, so I interact with it quite a bit, especially if I've got nothing else to do, find myself scrolling through it. And one of the things that always fascinates me, and I think businesses struggle to get their head around this, is the level of interaction I get on a post that really is only tenuously linked to work versus if I post something about, I suppose, a new audit standard or something like that. Obviously, probably something that's slightly more interesting than audit standard.
Slightly more
It's
interesting.
slightly more interesting. But, I recently posted something on LinkedIn which had a personal element to it. And I think I must have had, 500 likes, loads and loads of comments. But that must create a bit of an issue from the business's perspective in terms of sort of risk management. And you almost want to encourage that because it's helping your brand awareness, personal and
Yeah.
work,
Well,
potentially.
it's a fine line, Jamie, and businesses like us, we have a social media policy which we expect people to follow. But within that policy, there's plenty of opportunity for people to show a little bit of personality and a bit of a personal touch. And I remember the post you refer to because it was actually about social mobility on Social Mobility Week.
It was.
And I think that actually giving a little bit of an insight into one's personal life, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a key topic. It's part of the firm's core values. It's probably part of your own core values. And I think there's a place for it. But then I think you need to be very careful when you start going into things that may be more personal about things that you've done at the weekend that are not related at all to work. But if you can find a hook, I'd encourage you to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely, completely agree. And I think we'll come back to that sort of individual personal piece in a moment, actually. One other element you mentioned earlier is thought leadership. Can you just expand on what that means from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, it's basically a piece of research, Jamie. So it's an article that you would hope that your clients or your targets or your peers or your intermediaries could be interested in. So it can be anything from a change in legislation, changing government, changing tax. The problem with those, not that there's a problem because they're all really valuable, is that every Tom, Dick, and Harry does them, and they start to get a little bit vanilla, and we do them, and most of our competition do them. I think the thought leadership that really add value are when you're actually doing a piece of genuine research. So you're asking other people in the industry for their views. So we've done things like real estate sentiment surveys because it's all very well hearing what we think as professionals, but it's actually really interesting when you can collect a major data source. So those I think are often the best pieces of thought leadership, Jamie.
Okay, and this is all about really sort of building a profile, making yourself visible to your potential future clients and also your existing clients. But and it kind of is, it's in addition to the fact that you might still go to the typical networking event and walk into the room and build your network like that.
That's right. And actually, you must still absolutely do that. Post-COVID, the world has changed, and in-person networking events they are just not as successful as they were previously. And the reason why is people work from home more often. People don't always have set days in the office. If we were holding an in-person event, we would instantly never run one on a Monday or a Friday. So you've only then got Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays to do these. So it's a challenge because everyone's sort of work cycle has completely changed, but you need to do them. The time was where you could walk into a room and, as you say, you build your network, you build your reputation, people know you, you repeat, and you become a face and a name at these events. It's still really important, but you can't do it up to the extent that you used to be able to, which is why the way you interact with LinkedIn is almost your new sort of social window of of how you interact in the world, but in a virtual way.
Yeah, and I suppose once you've got that opportunity, I suppose, to get in front of a potential client, in the pre-COVID times, we'd probably never think of having that sort of scoping meeting to think about what services you could offer the client in a virtual way. Typically you would organise a meeting to go out to see them, or they would come into your offices.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it was about looking people in the eye, pressing the
Mm.
flesh, so to speak. I remember being a graduate, leading top FTSE 100 company back in the 1990s, and I thought I was doing really well on the graduate scheme, and I was learning. And I remember my boss saying to me one day, Richard, you're doing really, really well. However, let me give you one piece of advice. You'll never succeed in the business development world if you sat at your desk all the time. You need to be out meeting people and pressing the flesh. And I was of a sort of era where I thought that was almost socially unacceptable to be seen to be out at seminars or drinks receptions, and I thought it was expected for me to be seen to be sort of visible in the office. And that was a good piece of advice I thought that I was given then, and something I still share with my team, that we all get our job done, and we get our job done often at very different flexible hours now. But when there's an opportunity to go out and network, you really should still grasp it.
And what about those initial meetings with potential clients? That
Yeah.
face-to-face one,
Uh,
often now that it's a bit of a mix. You're doing Teams or Zoom or something like that rather than the face-to-face. How does the skill set change?
Well, first, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way there, Jamie. I think you could do it face to face, or you can do it virtual using Teams or Skype or something. I always say the answer to that is you ask the client what their preference is. And more often than not now, because of the ease and the convenience, they probably will do it in a virtual way, because world's changed and we're all used to dealing and doing things that way. Skill set, frankly, Jamie, I think is still actually the same. You need to be well prepared. You need to have done your research, thought about your questions, thought about what do I want to get out of the meeting. Skill set's the same. The tougher piece is it's tougher to build a personal rapport and brand on the virtual meeting than it is face to face. And also face to face, there's often a conversation topic that may be led because of something about the office or the area where the meeting is. So you need to look for them a little bit more in a virtual world. And there might be something in the background of someone's office, like you can't see on a podcast, but there's a framed England rugby shirt behind me. There's a conversation point. So almost look for those triggers in the virtual world of, well, how can I build up a rapport here with someone? So same skill set, but just maybe a little bit more challenging, and you need to think a bit more about it.
Yeah, I think one of the important lessons I was taught kind of during my sort of business development training was around trying to do the personal stuff for as long as possible. So, you'll go into a meeting and you will kick off with chit chat and doing exactly what you just said in terms of trying to pick up on a theme that you could run with for a while to try and build that sort of rapport with each other. I think that is much harder, and you have to concentrate much more on it when you are doing it virtually.
You do, yeah.
I always think, if someone is 3 minutes late to an online meeting, it seems like an eternity. It's much more functional than an in-person meeting. So to avoid just diving straight into the business, I think one of the lessons I've learned is to actually try and take a step back before diving in, to still try and do that personal conversation piece that, like you said, talking about your football team, your cricket team, or something like that.
Absolutely. Well, we started this meeting before we recorded dissecting last night's European Championship final and England's defeat. There's so often world things that you can talk about, and sport is also a particularly good one.
It is, it is. So it's trying to take those lessons that you would, the way you would run things in the in-person world and doing those in a virtual one, because going back to the individual piece that we were talking about earlier in terms of your brand proposition when you're building it individually and talking about your personal aspects of your life on things like LinkedIn, it's still it's the one thing I always think that sets you apart or will set you apart from your competition.
It
What,
shows
what
you have a personality, and it's how you help to build
absolutely,
your brand.
absolutely. And when I was say to people, when people keep talking about us being replaced with AI robots or something, my theory is that, hopefully, the relationship is the key thing that you'll have. And so I always think, you've really got to focus on that with your
Yeah.
existing clients as well.
Jamie, I
Continue
think
to
it's a
do that.
good point. There's lots of reasons why clients will choose to do business with you. But I can tell you now, technical knowledge is probably taken as table entry. I'm sure there's lots of people in our competitive firms that have just as much technical knowledge. People tend to like doing business with people that they get on with, and I think you should never try and lose sight of that, and hence the need to try and show a bit of personality.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about is generational business development, which sounds a bit odd, but we've talked about the typical way that we've done BD historically, how we're probably doing it now. There's a lot of chats around how Gen Zs communicate, et cetera, and people will believe what they want to believe about generational differences. But the reality is that it's possible that we are starting to sell to a different generation to what we've been used to. Do you have any views on that?
I do. I mean, one thing I'll say is marketing is it's a product life cycle that evolves and changes like so many other things. So looking back into the early days of my career, I'd see a partner in a professional services law firm, and he was probably under a bit of pressure to build his client portfolio. So we'd have a meeting, and he'd say, "Richard, I've got my appraisal coming up or something, and I need to win some work. I'd like a brochure." So it was like the first solution to everything. I need marketers to go away and create me a brochure, and then buy a mailing list, and then post it to hundreds, thousands of people. And it was clearly a very scattergun approach and not very technical, not very innovative. So that was always one thing. I need a brochure. Or the second thing would be like, I need an event. I need a drinks reception and to invite my clients and my contacts to it. So that, frankly, those sorts of things, a little bit old school now. The generations and then the target markets that we have now, you need to think digital first. So we use LinkedIn a lot. We use Instagram, albeit that's more actually to demonstrate our brand values. We use X, formerly Twitter. We've considered using TikTok. We aren't ready for the TikTok change yet because actually it's almost you need to recruit an army of people just to keep your TikTok material flowing. But yes, cycles change and they're evolving. And the good thing about the way we do things now in the digital world is I can give you like proof of a return on investment. I can give you how many campaigns have been sent, seen, viewed, compound viewed, who's looked at them, who hasn't looked at them, who's forwarded them on. So there's a wealth of science behind the marketing now, which does make it a lot easier to justify the investment in it.
So if you were a managing partner in a professional services firm and you need to justify, or someone's trying to justify a spend on sort of, digital marketing and sort of managing that process, what would your advice be to them?
I would say to follow a digital first marketing strategy. I'd say it's the absolute most crucial item that you can spend on your marketing budget now. Well, possibly with the exception of actually listening to your clients and doing some client listening and feedback. But the digital reach is so powerful. You rarely see companies doing major sort of national newspaper advertising anymore, or the company advertising or big sponsorships. We invest all the bang for our buck comes out for digital marketing spend, and that can be targeting people and doing targeted campaigns in LinkedIn, but it can also just be things like search engine optimization and what are our key USPs or our key service deliveries? Got to make sure people find you when they put them into Google.
And is
And as
artificial
my
intelligence?
advice always would be, as you know, Jamie, to managing partners of professional services firms, it's always whatever you think your marketing budget is, can you double it, please?
We definitely heard that quite a lot. The Is it changing with artificial intelligence though? So, talk a lot about AI, and I think it's impacted marketing quite a lot. But you talked about search engine optimization. That my understanding is that that could change over the next year or 2 years as people perhaps use AI tools to get the answers to their questions rather than a simple Google search.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a watch this space, to be honest, Jamie. We don't really know how it's going to pan out. I mean, one thing that you can do with AI, without doubt, on Chat GPT is probably write a piece of technical knowledge that would probably be 90, maybe even 100% accurate. The problem is that you don't really know the risk element at the moment. You're putting an awful lot of blind trust in a piece of technology to then be your personal brand builder. So I still think it's a bit of a watch this space and see how it plays out. I'm a little bit cynical about it because and I know you're the same, Jamie, it's still very much it's all about personality as well as your profile. And I can't see how you can get that through AI.
No, I agree. I agree. One question I wanted to ask was, we've kind of talked about COVID in terms of, well, I've talked about COVID and the way that, pre-COVID, post-COVID, the way that we market is different and the way that we do BD is different. Does that mean we've got a kind of skills gap potentially? And are there a cohort of people that perhaps haven't got the right experience to do BD the way that we need to do BD now?
That's actually a very good question, Jamie. And I know it's something that we're addressing, aren't we, within our practice? And I think there is a risk of a generation that we almost need to reset a little bit because there is a skill and an art to building a network and building a profile and meeting people. What do you do beforehand? What are your actions afterwards? It can be quite intimidating to enter a room of people that you don't know. But actually, there's lots of triggers and coaching that you can give people about how do you read a room, which is the group that you make an entrance to and why. And just as importantly, when you're in a conversation which isn't going anywhere, how do you leave that group in a very professional manner and move on to the next? And if we don't teach people and train this on doing this, how do we expect them to just develop those skills, off the cuff? Like, the answer is that you can't. So it is changing, and we do need to sort of remind people of the good old-fashioned skills of networking.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And what about client retention? So we talked a lot about, I suppose, new clients and attracting new clients and how you develop that process of, hopefully bringing those clients on board. What should firms be doing with existing clients, though? Has that changed?
Yes, it has. Look, I'd say loyalty still, it's a really key point still in any sort of business to business, any professional services relationship. But loyalty may not be as strong now as it might have been previously. And that's just simply because if you're not investing as much time in the sort of personal relationship side as you used to, clearly that bond may not be as strong as it was. So make sure you do still spend some personal time investing those in your clients and your targets, your intermediaries, and just maybe be a bit more tactical now in the way that you tailor your approach. You really need to understand your clients better than ever because if you know what floats their boats and you invite them to it, they'll probably come. Well, I'm sure they would come, but if you just do a fairly sort of generic Thursday evening drinks or something, I think you're going to really struggle with your uptake now for events. So you just got to really think a bit more about what works for your clients and what will they come to because if they're not in the office as much as they used to be, then the chances are they won't come to your event when they're working from home.
Yeah, I think we've definitely noticed it's harder to get people to come to things. And there has to be a really good draw for that event.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And even things like seminars. Seminars always used to be in person and there'd probably be a breakfast seminar. So people are busy. So you'd encourage them to come because they get free breakfast, but also because they'll meet wonderful Saffery contacts, but they'll also meet a good peer network. But also they get their CPD and their learning, and it's really important for people to maintain it. You now almost have to have this hybrid world of you can come in person or you can watch it in line. And at first, that was a very, very uncomfortable mix. And it's a hard dynamic for someone as a host to be able to engage with them half a room in person and half a room online. And I think, as a generation of professional business developers, we've got better at it. But it never sits that easily because you are bringing two very different environments together into one.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is a massive shift, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
it
uh,
is, and you almost need help. Like if you're doing the room, someone also needs to be like looking at the screen and all the questions that are coming in because you can't be a chair to people in a room and be reading the messages that are coming in on screen. So you have to have quite a well-oiled plan of how to deal with an event like that.
yeah, I think it sounds too much like multitasking to me in terms of trying to run both in the actual room and online questions.
Yeah.
Um, so we've covered probably two angles, I suppose, in reality. So the one is kind of like your individual brand, and then sort of how to get to your ideal client and how does that interaction work. What would your top tip be for each side of that? So, firstly, your individual brand, what would your top tip be?
For my individual brand, I'd say be responsible for building your own individual personal brand. It's not the corporate or central marketing function or BD function's responsibility to build individual brands. No, it's your responsibility. It's the content that you generate on social media. It's your interaction with your clients and your contacts. It's your presence out in the market still. You need to be seen. You can't be invisible. So take some personal responsibility for your own brand would be my first piece of advice.
And what about interacting with potential clients? What would your takeaway be?
Interacting with potential clients, I think needs to be done, sorry, a digital and social and a personal way. So find the right mix, but just remember the same business development principles. So if you're meeting a client for the first time, make sure that if it's a face to face, you find out what exactly is it they want to know, what are the key meeting objectives, what do you want to get out of it. Try and build that personal rapport. When you finish, you leave a business card. If it's a social on an online meeting, you still need to do all the same things. What are the objectives? What are the purpose? How do I build a rapport? How do I find a discussion point? You can't leave a business card, but you can contact them on LinkedIn and send a connection. But don't just send a lazy, generic connection. Actually, write a person note saying it was a real pleasure to meet you and thank you very much. I'll follow up on email, but it would be great to connect on social media. So you're still building that personal rapport, but you're doing it in a virtual way.
Excellent advice. Yeah, thank you, Richard, for joining me today. I'm sure we continue to see the working environment adapt and change, not only as society progresses, but also as the next generations move up the corporate ladder and impact cultures and activities at professional services firms. So as a reminder, Saffery provide a range of tax, compliance and business advisory services to professional practices and financial services specialists. And to find out how we could help you and your business, please visit www.saffery.com. Thank you very much.